Love helping your clients but hate sales and marketing, but somehow you ended up with sales and marketing responsibilities? Then this is the podcast for you. Hi, Chief Nerd Ruben Swartz here, and I spent a long time learning these lessons the hard way, and I want to help you learn them the easy way by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have figured out how to hack not just the code, but the sales and marketing process as well. Of course, as a nerdy person who hated struggling with complex CRMs, I had to create my own CRM for people who actually hate selling, which sounds like an oxymoron, but if it sounds interesting to you, check it out at Mimiran.com. That's Mimiran.com. And whether or not you need a new CRM, you'll find proposal templates and sample lead magnets to help you grow your business. Now let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have with me John Livesay, aka the Pitch Whisperer, who's a sales keynote speaker, and he's been through all kinds of ups and downs in his sales career. And he actually recently wrote a book, Better Selling Through Storytelling, the essential roadmap to becoming a revenue rock star. And if you're a longtime listener, you know that I'm a big fan of storytelling as part of the sales and marketing experience. And I wasn't clever enough to write a book about that, but John was. So there's actually a whole bunch of other accolades I could go into about John, but we let's get to the meat here. So John, welcome back to Sales for Nerds for round 2. Thanks for coming on again. And what do you have in your glass?
Thanks for having me back. I am a big fan of Stag's Leap.
And which Stag's Leap are you drinking?
The Chardonnay.
Very nice. I have a little bit of Cal Isla whiskey in my glass right now. So I don't know. It's like less than 100 degrees in Austin. So it's almost like winter here.
That's funny.
So John, you've been the pitch whisperer for some time. How did all of this coalesce into the thoughts behind better selling through storytelling?
Well, I noticed that whoever told the best story was getting the sale. And I thought to myself, the old way of selling, of just pushing out a bunch of information about yourself and your company and your product and hoping that some of it would stick, just didn't work anymore. And when I really did some research on storytelling, I found that instead of pushing information out, storytelling makes you magnetic and you pull people in with a good story. And that's what makes you memorable. And that's the biggest difficulty most salespeople have is what I'm saying going to stick after I walk out the door.
Sure. Now, some people are going to say, well, of course, whoever tells the best story is going to win. Those salespeople are always making up stories. But that doesn't really seem to be the approach that you're advocating, right?
Yes, it's not making up stories so much as telling a story about why the company, and why the story of a case study come to life through a story format. And there's a structure that a good story has that makes it stick and makes it memorable and ideally has some emotional connection.
Okay, so can we go into the structure?
Sure. The first part is exposition. You paint the picture, the who, what, where, when that we learned in journalism. And then you describe a problem, and there's got to be some kind of conflict in that problem and a little bit of drama, ideally. And then there's a solution that you solve. And then here's the secret sauce that most people forget in their storytelling. It's the resolution. What is life like after you come and solve this problem with your product or service for someone? So I can give you a quick example to tie it all together. When I was working with an architecture firm who was going in to give their pitch against other firms to remodel an airport, they had a case study of helping another airline. And I said, they had some before and after pictures. And I said, these are great pictures, but there's still no story here. So the exposition, tell me exactly how long ago this other airport was that you worked on. Okay, so 5 years ago, you helped JetBlue at JFK remodel the airport. And the problem was you had to take up all of the tiles around the retail stores in the middle of the night and get it fixed so the stores could still open. Okay, now we know where we are. We're in the story. And you tell that, we had all the vendors on call at 9 p.m. and we had till 9 in the morning to fix it. And sure enough, at 2 in the morning, a fuse blew and somebody we had on call came and fixed it. And at 8:59 in the morning, the last tile went down and all the stores opened on time. Now, 2 years after the renovation, sales are up in the retail stores 15% because people are spending more time shopping because we've created such a beautiful place that people want to spend time in.
Got it. Okay. So it's like you could watch this. It's a movie.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of excitement. You're not 100% sure if everything's going to work out.
Exactly.
There's danger. There's conflict.
Yes. And the big here is when you tell that story, your client is the hero and you are the Sherpa or Yoda in Star Wars. And a lot of people think, oh, if I'm going to tell a story, I'm going to be, the star of the story. Not necessarily. Your client should be the hero of the story. And then your prospective new client sees themselves in that story and says, oh, I need you to be the Sherpa to help me through that, navigate that problem.
Amen. I'm all for that. And it's funny you say Yoda. I actually show people a slide of Luke and 3PO and R2 when they meet Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I say, you are the old man who is there to help and who the hero needs to get where he's going or she's going, but you are not the hero. That's the buyer.
Yes. Love it.
So, okay. So I think that makes a lot of sense. At least to me, it does. Maybe I'm just already bought into this because it's got, like, I fully believe in this notion. And I think there's something very human about the way we absorb and tell stories. And it often gets lost because we think we don't have time to tell stories. And I think you and I actually had a little Twitter thing online where you were talking about storytelling amongst kids. And one of the things I notice is if you ask my kids what happened in class, nothing happened. But if you ask what happened on the playground, they can go into like a half-hour monologue with tons of details and they remember all of it, down to the little minute who said what when, and then that caused this person to whatever. All that information is in there and very relevant to them. And I feel like if you go into science class or history class or math class or whatever, they just throw a bunch of stuff at you and there's no story. And consequently, we hate it, even though that subject matter could be really interesting.
Well, history is a great example of that. If you just are presented with a bunch of facts and dates to memorize with no context or a story to make it come to life, it's just boring stuff to memorize. But if you have a great history teacher who tells you the story of a particular battle and, who was involved and who, the impact that had on the lives of the families whose child died on the field, it's much more memorable and emotionally engaging.
Right. And it's like, I think for a lot of people in this country, speaking of America here, people might have a better understanding of the history of the Game of Thrones fantasy universe than actual history because of the way it's presented, right?
Yes. Well, this concept of winter is coming is one of the classic storytelling genres of, is our brain craves things that are fight or flight. Do I need to pay attention here? Or something new and exciting that I haven't heard before. And so when you tap into one of those two things, fear, fight or flight stuff, or something new, shiny new toy, someone saying a phrase they've never heard put together before, that's what breaks through the clutter and our brain processes this and goes, oh, I should pay attention.
Right. Okay. Got it. And I think a lot of people in the business world, I don't know whether they just picked up bad habits from school or what, but they kind of take a lot of the story out of the whole thing and just present a bunch of facts and wonder why they're not getting it. They were like, but the ROI is so solid. I don't know why they're not buying.
Well, a lot of it has to do with, first, you have to become aware that there's a problem, that the old way of just putting out information doesn't work. And I tell examples. I said, if you're going to go buy a sports car, Ferrari, Lamborghini, whatever it is, I can promise you that salesperson's not talking about how many miles per gallon that car gets.
Right.
And instead, it's saying you're going to feel sexy, you're going to feel the thrill of driving this, all of that stuff. So we buy everything emotionally and then back it up with logic. Even people in a purchasing situation, if you can tell a story that fits the criteria of this is a good price, but here's the outcome of why this is going to be better than what you have now, and future pace them. Imagine 6 months, a year from now, how much more efficient you're going to be running the accounting department or whatever it is. That's the feeling that people want, and then they back it up with logic.
Right. You want to get promoted to the next level up, and you need a big win to do that, and blah, 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 blah. And this seemingly mundane thing that isn't sexy at all is not a Ferrari in many cases in the business world, but it can help you get where you want to be and give you that feeling like you get when you're behind the wheel of the Ferrari.
Exactly.
Now, you have this 5 eyes ladder, which I thought was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Walk people through that real quick.
Well, the concept is, how do you go from invisible to irresistible, both in your dating life and in your career? And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in both. And for example, if you ask somebody out on a coffee date for the first time, you probably aren't going to ask them to marry you. And yet in sales, so many people go, look, you've never heard of me, my company, or my product, but I'm going to ask you to buy. whether it's something online or when I'm on a sales call. And there's several rungs of the ladder that we have to work up. And so what makes this structure so valuable is everyone listening can write down a client that they have. Who do I would love to have as a buy from me, but they don't even know I exist. I'm invisible. Just that awareness. Then the next rung up is insignificant. Again, back to dating, I don't know what's worse, being invisible or insignificant. But in the business world, let's say somebody says, oh, I sell life insurance. I'm like, well, that's nice. That's insignificant to me because I'm not in the market for that. Then you move up to interesting. And maybe you say something clever or witty at a party and someone's like, maybe I wrote you off too soon. I'm not going out with you, but I'm interested at least to know you a little more. The same thing in sales. You say or do something that's somewhat interesting that they thought, I've never heard of that before, or I'm interested to know more. And then finally you get up to the intriguing rung where people are literally leaning in going, what would it look like if I went on a date with you? And then you paint this amazing picture. Or business people have said to me, I'm intrigued to know more. How would that work? They're leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get up to irresistible. And this is in the dating world, of course, when the person can't stop thinking about you and they're texting you all the time. And in business, these are your brand ambassadors, people who love you. And you need to be focused on what can they do and how can I reward them for being a source of referrals and promoting me? And what can I do to keep myself irresistible? So once you identify your clients on that ladder, you can work with your team to say, well, how do I move somebody from interesting to intriguing? I'm stuck here. We're stuck at interesting. I'm in the friend zone at work.
Right.
And so just that awareness of where people are on the ladder will really help your sales.
So I think for a lot of people, especially if you're in a small business, the biggest problem is you're invisible to 90+% of the market and or insignificant to 90% of the rest of it. How does storytelling help with that problem of addressing the vast majority of potential folks who don't even know we exist?
Well, the better you tell the story of exactly one person that you've helped your potential clients can identify with. And again, the more specific you are, this is who this is for. This is who this is not for. So if you're targeting, in my case, I speak to companies who have to go up against other firms in a shootout or a bake-off or a beauty contest or an interview. People call it all kinds of things, but that's my niche.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in an industry where you have to go up against another 2 firms, you're in the final 3 and you have an hour to convince them why I am a great speaker to show people how to be memorable and win big awards through that storytelling technique. So if you're at the invisible rung of the ladder, the more specific your story is, the more your audience will relate to it and find you.
So you put it out there and you don't worry so much about how do I get this in the hands of someone else. But if you tailor it to that right person, you trust that eventually it's going to get there.
Yes. And again, if you're, for example, my book, The Publicist is So Smart, they said, all right, who are the industries that you speak to? And I said, well, ad agencies, architects, executive search firms, PR firms, anybody, again, in that world of having to pitch against other firms. And they said, great, we're going to pitch the trade industries for those industries. So for architects, there's something called church.design that I have a story on, an article on how to win business for architects. And that whole industry is just talking about architects who design and build churches. And then there's something called PR couture that goes to publicists. So they know they have to win business and pitch against other publicists. And they picked up my story on how to win businesses if you're a publicist. So find your lane and then create content that gives them valuable content and target their trade industries, and you'll go from invisible to at least interesting.
Okay. So basically you're telling a story of an individual who might be a buyer or a champion at your client.
Mm-hmm.
And what was like before, how did they find you? What did they need to do, et cetera? The whole thing, basically, the whole journey they took.
Yes.
And then the idea is the closer someone matches, the closer someone identifies with that persona in the story, the more likely they are to find the content, first of all, in the sea of content out there, and then 2, want to connect with you and potentially do business with you.
You've got it. That's exactly right. Okay,
awesome. And I think that part of the notion here is, maybe we think our market is 1 million people or whatever it is, but really based on the persona of our ideal client, maybe it's 1,000 people, something much smaller, or 100 people, but it doesn't matter because we're only serving 10 of them right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can always go after the next 90 or the next 500 or whatever. And then eventually we're going to have more stories to tell. They're going to let us relate to the other folks. And we don't have to go from 0 to 1 million right away if we're a B2B brand.
Exactly. You know, I remind people that Amazon just sold books when they launched.
Right. And they weren't even B2B, right? They were still B2C.
Yes, yes. And then they started selling everything under the sun. But they first proved themselves as the book seller. And so, you know, that great phrase, the riches are in the niches, is so true. And if you look at a company like Amazon, and whether you're B2B or B2C, you're like, what's my one niche? So, for example, when I was being interviewed, I was in my own little, bake-off shootout interview. I was between me and another 2 speakers to speak to this executive search firm. They had said to me, have you spoken to other executive search industry firms? And I said, I haven't, but I have spoken to architects, and they are set up in a very similar business model to you. They have practice areas they specialize in. They have the same situation where they have to go and present against 2 other firms. And I have a story of how I helped them win $1 billion 5-year project to renovate the Pittsburgh airport. Would you like to hear that story? And they said, yes. And then they saw themselves in that story, and then they hired me. So to your point, Ruben, pick your niche, then you can start expanding and connecting the dots. Even if you don't have direct experience, you have experience adjacent. And like in real estate, they'll say, oh, it's Beverly Hills adjacent.
Right.
You're close enough with the experience. And again, if they see themselves in that story, I never thought of us being like architects, but I guess we are in terms of the way we're structured in our business model. And if you've got them to win a new client, you could probably do the same for us, even if you didn't have exactly that niche. But because I had the architect niche to begin with, it allowed me to expand into others.
But if you had said, I serve all real estate in LA or the whole state of California, no one would have been able to identify that you're the expert for them. But if you say, I'm Beverly Hills adjacent, they're like, oh, I'm pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how we can kind of bring people hopefully to the interested level.
Mm-hmm.
How do we go from interested to intrigued to irresistible?
Well, Michael Phelps, when I had the opportunity to meet him when I made a sale to Speedo when I was at Condé Nast, I went up to him and I asked him, I said, you know, everyone says you're such a great swimmer because of your physique and the lung capacity, but I'm guessing there's something else. And he said, yes, John. My coach asked me years ago, Michael, are you willing to work out on Sundays? And I said, yes, coach. He goes, guess what? We just got 52 more workouts in a year than your competitors. So I tell people when they hear my keynote that story, because the takeaway is, what are you willing to do? Or what can you think to do that your competition hasn't done or isn't willing to do that gets you up from interesting to intriguing to irresistible?
So let's just, that's a great, everyone can identify with the Michael Phelps story because he's amazing and he's blessed with like an Aquaman physique and he's a crazy hard worker. What about us more boring people who are like, I don't know, helping real estate companies or helping architectural firms or whatever it might be?
Yes.
Right. We're not Olympians. How do we translate that into something that doesn't sound like the normal corporate mush of, well, we really work hard to exceed your demanding expectations, blah, 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 right?
I'll give you an example. So when Anthem Insurance was interviewing me versus 2 other speakers, they had said the same question. Have you spoken to a lot of other healthcare companies? And at the time I had not. Now I have several under my belt. But I said to them, well, what else is going on after I give the keynote if I'm the one that you select? And they said, oh, we're going to have an improv session and have people throw out objections from the audience. And some of the people are going to role play being a doctor and some Anthem people. And I said to them, what if? And that's always a great way to get people in the right brain, imagination, storytelling. Imagine. I said, what if I stayed after my keynote and was part of that improv session? If somebody got stuck in the improv, I could whisper in their ear something from my keynote that would keep them going. And they said, oh my God, we hadn't even thought of that. That's a great idea. Wow, you really are the pitch whisperer. And I ended up doing it and getting the job because I came up with an idea that nobody else had thought to do or asked the question to find the need, that might be something they would want and like. And so that's taking the Michael Phelps story into your own personal life. And when I did it, it was a huge success. And people said, wow, I wish you could be in my ear all the time.
Nice. And it sort of helps because it literally made you the manifestation of the pitch whisperer.
Yes. And I went from just being an interesting option to, oh, we're intrigued to know how much what would that look like if you stayed and did improv? And then when they thought about it, it made me irresistible as the selection.
And I think that's a great point. I want to reiterate that. The whole notion of what if, right? You're not saying I promise that X or I guarantee Y or whatever, something that they may not even care about for all you know. You're just kind of opening up. Hey, let's imagine things for a second instead of just going through the same old boring process like most people do.
Right. And what if opens up the conversation for collaborative conversations to begin. So it's not just me again spewing information.
Right.
I'm like starting a conversation and then it becomes collaborative and then it becomes their idea with you. And then that's really when you get people to want to work with you.
Right. And then they can go back to their bosses and say, hey, and we had this brilliant idea, not even mentioning you necessarily, that he's going to stick around and help out later. And we got it all for the same price or whatever, right?
Yes, exactly.
Everyone looks good. Now, you had some other interesting stuff in there that doesn't, I think, directly relate to storytelling, but it's so important around the mindset that you have to go into in some of these situations, because even if you do everything right, sales isn't about batting 1,000, right? There's always going to be rejection. There's always going to be no's. There's always going to be days that seem to have a whole bunch of no's just because that's the way random statistics work. And you had a great line in there about how people often don't feel appreciated. And I think you wrote something like appreciating you is not their job. And you're talking about bosses and kids and spouses and so on, parents. It's your job. That's why it's called self-esteem. And it's like, yeah, right? Like, give yourself a little bit of credit for what you do. Don't expect other people to give you all the credit for that stuff. You just do your thing, right? I thought that was brilliant.
Thank you. Well, one of my personal missions is to help as many people as possible, whether they're in sales or not, get off this self-esteem roller coaster of only feeling good if your numbers are up or things are going great, and bad about yourself if your numbers are down or you got laid off or whatever's going on. But when you remember who you are is not tied to an outcome or a job or anything else, you really are free from going on that up and down. I was on that roller coaster and it's miserable. And so when I got laid off from Condé Nast and then rehired 2 years later, I had this aha moment of, wait a minute, I'm the same person, whether I'm being laid off or winning salesperson of the year. And so that's really what compels me to write the book and give keynote talks to people, is to not only help them become storytellers, but to help their mindset realize that when they don't look outside of themselves for their self-esteem, they're really free to enjoy their life and their career.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I'm sorry, I think I've done a disservice to you and the listeners a little bit, because usually I go into a bio at the beginning and I was like, well, John's already been on, but probably a bunch of people may not have heard your earlier interview. And I think it is worth noting, because I always like to kind of get people to understand that these folks who are writing books and giving keynote talks about sales and they're super smart gurus and all that, they're made of the same flesh and blood as everyone else. And they've had interesting stories of getting to that point, right? The whole notion is that a lot of, for Sales for Nerds, is people who don't think they could possibly be good at sales. Actually, you can, right? And you're this guy who gets up on stage at TEDx and in front of these big companies and you talk about sales and you're the pitch whisperer and you write books and you go on TV and so on. But like you say, you got laid off from a sales job. Like, there's not, you weren't born this magical sales guru who turns everything to gold, right? You had to learn stuff and you had to struggle and you had to do all the same stuff that everyone else has to do.
Yes. And I tell that story in my keynote so that people know that I've been in their shoes. It's not like I'm just writing a book or talking about something that I've never experienced. And when you do that, you pull people in. Again, that's storytelling at its best, because they go, oh, he gets us. And then I customize my talk to whatever industry I'm talking to. And I remember after the Anthem talk, they said, how long have you been in healthcare? I just smiled and I said, I'm actually not, but I did enough research and talked to enough people that I could sprinkle in some acronyms and know what they mean and things like that. So I think it is important. The good news is everyone can learn to be a storyteller. And when you do, it will impact not only your career, but your personal life. As you referenced earlier on Twitter, the publicist has got me on television of giving advice to parents on how to turn a one-word answer from your kid into a conversation, because they typically say, how was your day? Fine, good. But guess what? We have that same problem in sales. You ask an open-ended question, tell me about this. It's okay. Oh, I'm not getting any information about a problem that I could possibly solve here. Tell me a story of the best day of your life so far at this job. Or tell me a story of the worst day. What's the worst thing that's ever happened? Tell me a story about what keeps you up at night.
That's a great point. And I have mixed results with my kids. And it's very interesting, almost bimodal distribution, where I either get fine or I get one of them talking so long that the other one needs to break in and interject their stories. So somewhere I'm sure there's a happy medium. I haven't found it yet. But also great point about the sales and getting people to share their stories. I think a lot of times if we're in that kind of fact-based, checklist-based world where, they say they have budget, check. We've met the decision maker, check, right? They've said their problem is X, which we're a company that solves X, check. And there's no exchange of stories.
Right.
And then you have a lame proposal that claims to have great ROI, but doesn't really speak to anybody in the room, including your firm. And you wonder why you're getting ghosted or why they're not responding or why they maybe decided not to go with anybody because they got a whole bunch of crappy proposals. And you have to have that exchange of stories so that people understand what's really going on, right? Like that we're not computers. We don't communicate by API. We communicate via stories.
Yes. And with all the technology and the ability for people to just communicate via text messaging or Skype messaging, even within the same company, the need for stories is even more crucial than it was before all this technology came around.
Because it's what cuts through the noise?
And it has an emotional connection.
Got it. Okay. Very nice.
And makes you memorable. Because remember, when I was working with the executive search firm, they said, one of our biggest problems in these bake-off shootouts interviews is we can't control what order we go in. We always request can be the third out of the third to present, hoping that whoever goes last is memorable. And the problem is you can't control that, but you can control telling a story that's memorable and emotionally. And even if you go first, you're setting the bar. And if the other people don't have stories, they're still going to remember you.
Got it. So I think that's a great point. And it's funny because, you're talking about the structure of the story, and I have a proposal template that you can get on my Mimran website, not on the Sales for Nerds website. But it basically runs through exactly that. And my whole thing is a proposal is a story, not a brochure. If you send someone a brochure, they're not going to be very interested. That's for marketing. If you're actually in a sales cycle, you need to be telling a story with the buyer as the hero. So that's why I'm like, yeah, storytelling. It's all there. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about how do you blend your story with the buyer's story so that it kind of all weaves together nicely.
Well, I think the easiest example of your story and the buyer story weaving together would be after describing a case study in the case of the architects who had done some work for JetBlue pitching a Pittsburgh airport. The end of the old way of closing is, do you want to buy? Or, Maslow said that great quote, if the only tool in your toolbox is the hammer, you go around looking for nails to hit. So storytelling gives you another tool in your toolbox. So after you tell this story of another client that is just like this potential client, and you're the Sherpa or Yoda, then the closing question becomes, does that sound like the kind of journey you'd like to go on with us? Now your story and their story and the potential client story have all become one big story of, yes, I've seen myself in that story. I would love you to do that for me, what you did for them. And then storytelling is another way of not just becoming memorable and emotionally engaging, but it's a new way to close a sale.
And it seems like it's an interesting way to surface objections because they could say, well, yeah, that all sounds good, but Pittsburgh is different because of blah, 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 blah. And we have whatever that's different. Can you help? Right. And so that objection is going to be there. It's going to prevent the sale. But if you can surface it by being inviting through the story, hopefully you have a chance to discuss it and address it collaboratively. No?
Oh, well, yes. In fact, I believe that people always have three unspoken questions when they hear you pitching anything, whether you're using a story or not. And I can tell you what those three unspoken questions are.
Please.
If you'd like.
Please. And
then you can answer those unspoken questions in your story. The first one is, most people have this reverse order. Again, they go, well, if you know me and my company, then you'll trust me and then you'll like me. The know, like, and trust. I believe that order is in reverse. I believe it starts from the gut. Do I trust you first? Which is where the handshake came about, to show you didn't have a weapon. So once people can feel like this person, I can trust this person, they're not going to hurt me, that defense goes down. Okay, got it. Then we move up to the heart. Do I like this person and this company? In fact, the architecture firm said, we're going to hire the people we like the most because you could all do the work. And then they said, oh, God, get John Livesay in here. Need some help with the soft skills, the likability and the confidence and storytelling. How do we make ourselves likable? Well, It's empathy. The more you show you understand the person's problem, the better they think you have their solution. And then it moves from the gut to the heart to the head, which is to your point, Ruben. Will this work for me? That's what they're asking themselves as they're listening to you. It's great that worked for them, but we have these challenges. So if you anticipate that, and you know that's an unspoken question, you can weave that into your story. Now while JetBlue and JFK may not be the exact same situation in Pittsburgh, there are more similarities and differences. And the one difference that you have that they didn't have, we've already figured that out too. Then they're in the story.
Okay, very good. And you actually had a little section on objections in the book, which I think is great because so many people get freaked out when customers start raising objections. And I think you, at the beginning of that chapter, raise the thing to keep in mind of objections, which is no one asks questions about products they're not considering purchasing.
Yes, I mean, back to the dating analogy. Do you really ask someone where they're from and how long they lived here or anything if you're not interested in possibly going on a date with them? No, you just go, nice to meet you. And so if you change your mindset and go, oh, this is a buying signal, as opposed to getting defensive.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got this notion of communicating through stories, both our story and our past client's story and our prospective client's story, kind of putting them together in a journey that everyone can envision going on together in the future, using those stories to bring people from the invisible to insignificant to interesting stage, and then on to intriguing and irresistible. Did I get I think I hit all 5, right?
You did.
See, you got it memorable. I like it.
Good.
Even I can remember it. It's that easy, folks. And then when you get into the heart of the sales cycle, address those 3 questions, starting with making sure they trust you, like you, and know you, as you point out, kind of the reverse order than the way it's typically taught. And then invite the objections, their buying signals.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
That's it. And, all those things, combined, being confident, being passionate, having a great story, showing empathy, all those, quote, soft skills will allow you to sell your hard skills, whether your hard skill is being an architect or a lawyer or whatever you went to school to do.
Right. And it all involves stuff that even if you're not a quote unquote expert storyteller, like when you sit down and talk to your friends or your family or your colleagues or whatever about a project, you basically tell a story. You don't just put a bunch of numbers in the air and call it a day, right? Like everyone, you're already doing this. Maybe not at John Livesay level, but you're doing it to some human level.
Yes. And now you have a little checklist to go, how can I make my story better? Is there a resolution? Oh, I forgot. I need to tell people about what life is like after that problem is solved. Did I paint the picture at the beginning enough so they feel like they know where they are in the story and they're with me? So just a little checklist on your storytelling techniques will really help you become a better storyteller.
Got it. That's great. Now, John, where can people find you if they want to find out more, other than buying your Better Selling Through Storytelling book on Amazon or wherever books are sold?
Yes. Well, I have a free gift for your listeners. If they text the word pitch, P-I-T-C-H, to 66866, I will email them a free sneak peek of my book, Better Selling Through Storytelling. So that's the word pitch with a P, 66866. And they can go find me on Instagram at The Pitch Whisperer. You can find me on my website, johnlivesay.com. There's all kinds of free content there, my TEDx talks and podcasts, and lots of short little snippets on how to be more persuasive or how to be a better storyteller.
Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time. Enjoy your Chardonnay and cheers.
Cheers, and thanks for having me back on.
Thanks for listening. If you have a friend who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. Have a friend who wouldn't benefit, but you haven't talked to in a while? Give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and help me create the show that's most useful to you. And if you're frustrated with your sales and marketing process or lack thereof, check out Memorin, the CRM for people who hate selling. Until next time.